Welcome to Hacked in the Dark, a podcast featuring Forge in the Dark games and their designers. I am Justin.
And I am Mark.
And we'll be your hosts for today's episode, Factional Intrigue with a Couple of Drakes. Today, we're going to sit down with Navi and Sean Drake to talk about Court of Blades. Welcome, both of you.
Well, thanks for having us.
Thanks for coming on the show. You're going to be our first design duo on the show. We had Strash on a couple of weeks ago, and he is part of a design duo as well. And I think that's a really interesting way to work. How did the two of you find working as a team?
We actually work really well together. We've been married for a long time, so we pretty much complete each other's thoughts as it is. So usually one of us will come up with an idea, and as soon as we spitball it, the other one just takes it and runs with it. So we have a really great back and forth. Everything's very collaborative. We don't really have a clear division of labor. Everything's a group effort.
Exactly. We like bouncing off of each other. We have since we first met. We've been writing together for a really long time, longer than we've been married. But really what it comes down to is that I have crazy off-the-wall ideas. She goes ahead and takes them and filters them down, and then she says, now how do we do that mechanically? And then I take over.
Would you say you don't have like any one area of focus, either of you, but do you have specialties?
As far as specialties go, I think Navi's actually my lead world builder, and she makes sure that everything is, flavorful. And my job is to kind of take that flavor and reinforce it through mechanics and what's going to make it easiest to run as a GM.
I agree with that.
Makes you the nuts and bolts. That dynamic, is that reflected as well in, is there certain sections that only Navi's going to touch, so to speak?
I think that Navi does. She built our world building section, kind of a taste of Ilrian, the setting of Court of Blades. She's the one who wrote most of that, and established a lot of the flavor of the world, a lot of what the people of Ilrian and the people who live there really prize, and what they value, and what sort of informs the fiction. And then she kind of gave me an idea of what kind of characters would inhabit this world and what kind of stories the game was built to tell. And then I spitballed a whole bunch of various mechanics, and she's like, that's good, but maybe we could cut this, and she kept my scope very, very tight and focused.
Navi, would you like to tell us about the premise of Court of Blades, since I know that's your big production right now?
The whole premise of Court of Blades was to create sort of a political pressure cooker. So we borrowed from Duskfall, that intense, you're trapped in a city, everything you do matters because everybody knows who you are, right? We took that same idea and then we made it even more of a pressure cooker because we added on social seasons where now everything you do is really crammed into a narrow space. So it's intended to be a very intense political intrigue where the friends you make matter, the enemies you make matter, and you have to kind of keep all of these things in mind as you're doing your jobs. You can't just kind of disappear into the night and, lay low for a while because you're working for this big grand house. Everyone knows who you are. You have to kind of play by the rules. So that was really what we were shooting for, is a political intrigue game.
The high-level concept is it's a game of power politics, Renaissance magic, romantic skullduggery, forged in the dark.
Yeah, I think this mix of intrigue and magic and romance is quite striking. Some might say a surprise sort of entry, given the fictional distance, seemingly, from gangs of, New Victoria or Streets of Akros, There seems to be maybe a divide, but I think there's actually a lot of parallels here. I'm wondering how Court of Blades might show us more about hitting that balance. You could go one direction, yes, but it's sort of like you're going to be walking a tightrope between all these different, right, intrigue, magic, and romance type, these three factors, I think, right?
Well, certainly. In Blades in the Dark, it's very, very heist fiction. It's very Peaky Blinders in this, ghost punk Victorian city. Like our roots, we love the Renaissance, we love the Medicis, we love these powerful families maneuvering, but if we're going to play a game, we can't start at the top, so we decided that instead of scoundrels, we're playing retainers to these noble houses. We're still out on, dirty jobs on occasion, we're interacting with all of these various factions, but at its core, it's still very much you are problem solvers to power. You can leverage your social position to solve problems that maybe a scoundrel couldn't. It is a tightrope, but it's explicitly supposed to be. Otherwise, where's the fun in the game, right?
Absolutely.
I'm curious what brought you to this particular genre of courtly intrigue. Is it something that you've been a fans of?
We are certainly fans of courtly intrigue. We've done a lot of play-by-post in the past that kind of fit neatly into this niche. I mean, others as well. We are interested in a broad range of genres, but what actually brought us to finishing this game first before any of our others, because we've had other games in the works that we kind of put in a desk and we're like, well, let's let that simmer. But this one was actually inspired by a friend of ours, a very good friend of ours, who was talking about how she basically wished that she could play the what's Wicked Eyes and Wicked Hearts. Do you remember what that was called?
I can't remember the actual name of the quest now that I'm thinking about it, but it was in Dragon Age Origins, and she said the masked ball in Orlais was her very favorite part of any video game ever, and she just never wanted it to end. So I'm like, I could probably build that. And Nat is like, we should totally build that.
That's really sweet. You mentioned play-by-post. Is that where you both have your role-playing start, or just a place where you converged?
Well, it's certainly where our histories converge, but actually we're both, like, until fairly recently, we've been very, very traditional role-playing games. You know, I cut my teeth on the basic box of D&D, and you know, I played that for probably 20 years before I even stepped outside that walled garden and found all these awesome story games.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, interesting. I come from a very similar background too, and had kind of fallen in to discover Blades in the Dark and Powered by the Apocalypse all kind of in one flurry. And so I'm interested to see how that plays into the design. I'm also wondering, picking up a Game of Thrones vibe, perhaps, from some of the descriptions? Is that a touchstone for what we're talking about here?
I think that it is a touchstone that people are very familiar with, in that there were a lot of powerful leaders vying for, that position, a throne in that case, right? They all wanted the Iron Throne, but in ours, they're fighting to sit as the first house. So it is similar in that regard. We don't have any nationwide combat. We center in very keenly on the city of Ilrian, so everything that happens there. But the families are very different, and the families do come from different cultures. So it does give you a little bit of that vibe if you're looking for it. But if you're looking for leading armies into a giant war to take over an entire country, that's really not the nature of the game. We're talking more about like principalities, like in ancient Rome or Venice, like everything was kind of, well, things were still contained.
Yeah, Game of Thrones, for me, it definitely fixates, at least from my reading of the books and my viewing of the show, it's very much the powers that be are the central characters, and we are playing, Kingmaker. Like if we were going to cast like the retinues, the retainers of a Court of Blades, I think that we would probably be like Jory, the guard that Ned Stark brought to King's Landing, or like Varys's little birds or something like that. Like we would very much be the people who are in the trenches doing the work. Every now and then we hit upon a moment where we get to really affect the course of the politics of this grand sweeping narrative. But at the same time, we're also not nobles in our own right. We're hoping one day to get there. We're scrabbling up the ladder trying to prove ourselves invaluable, but we're definitely not going to ever sit on that throne.
That's an important distinction. That makes this very special in that way, then, I think. In Blades in the Dark, how it's very focused on like a small group that is really vying for itself. This suggests a much grander purpose behind each of the groups that you would have in play. How do you highlight that?
So I think that the thing that really differentiates us from Blades in the Dark is, in Blades in the Dark, your primary currency, the coin of the realm, is coin. Everybody wants to flash a coin. In Court of Blades, we focus more on favor. It's more of, what is your name worth? Like, money is not an object. The house will make sure that you get what you need to accomplish your goals. It's just, what's it going to cost you socially? We had, at the very beginning, I pitched, resources that we would have to buy and work around, but it was too much, and I think she cut to the quick of that.
Yeah, it's something we toyed with for a bit, and no matter how I tried to make sense of it, we just couldn't fit resources in there in any meaningful way. And I think it was because the resources were tied too much to the houses that are being served, and you're the retainers. That's really not your concern, and you really shouldn't have to be concerned about those particular aspects of the house. So yeah, we ended up stripping out resources and basically removing a lot of extra paperwork that everybody would have had to have sat down and done between games and whatnot, which is really not keeping in the spirit of what makes Forged in the Dark games really great. Like, nobody wants to do that much paperwork, and we already have a little bit of extra upkeep with the GM's turn in ours, so we wanted to minimize that. So yeah, with the social clout, right? How, like, it doesn't, money you're taken care of, but who knows you? What's your reputation? That really matters a lot more than flashing coin.
How invaluable are you to the house? That's your major cachet. That's what you spend to get better results. That's what you spend to acquire assets. That's what you spend basically to buy your way into polite society.
Yeah, your social credit, so to speak.
I really resonate with the Orlais, the Dragon Age comparison there. That really puts the image in my head of what you're going for with Court of Blades and gets me pretty excited. You mentioned that you have started some other games, and I'm wondering if we can take a little detour before we get into our topic and have you talk about what else you've worked on in the field.
We have another game that we're currently working on called Kids in the Dark. It's a fun kind of, like the old 80s horror movies where you like Freddy Krueger and Stephen King's It and all those things where like you have children that are up against, these forces, and the adults don't believe them or they don't want to hear about it. And so it's kind of one of those, it's a really fun kind of horror setting. It's, great for any 80s, 90s child. We're trying to trim out most of the mechanics to really narrow it down to a one-shot to release for this Halloween while the game is still in development, because it is certainly nowhere near completion, but it is pretty close to being runnable for a hack. So that's a really fun one that we have coming up.
At the same time, we're also doing a couple of little supplemental things, mostly in connection with the Hack in the Dark jams, actually, that are going on right now. There's the zine jam for the one-page scores, and there's the playsheet jam that's going on right now, The Usual Suspects, which, awesome, by the way. And currently, we're trying to make a sports team in Duskfall that people can play that is playing the Duskfall pastime, the much-beloved roof ball. So that's going to be up and ready to go here pretty soon as well.
Thank you for bringing attention to those things. We haven't even introduced them ourselves, I suppose.
Yeah, we're pretty excited, and I'm not going to stop talking about it, so I would apologize, but it would ring hollow.
So people know, as of this recording, I'm hosting myself a jam, Unusual Suspects, for Blades in the Dark playbooks. It's going to be a place I'm hoping to consolidate a whole bunch of custom playbooks, which, while there are custom playbooks for Blades already, I think a lot of them have kind of fallen into obscurity since the downfall of Google+. And so I'm really excited to see that we've already got like 10 playbooks only a couple days in, and we have like 80 participants. So that's really exciting to see.
Yeah, big hype for that. Go ahead and call out your playbook name, I guess, because you'll be claiming it you're at work there.
My submission, if I don't do any more, I'm going to be submitting the Stitcher, which I'm just putting the finishing touches on, which is kind of like an 1800s medicine person / like charlatan, kind of inspired by the idea that back in the day, scientists and medical professionals kind of didn't know what they were doing in a lot of cases, and they kind of had to convince themselves that they were experts in a field that didn't completely actually exist.
Amazing.
Yeah, so that's kind of the premise. Look for it. It should be done by the time you're listening to this. And check out all of the amazing playbooks on that. Thanks for the little interlude, Drakes. I appreciate it. And of course, check out the charity zine that we're also putting together. That should be just finishing up around the same time. You two are dabbling in design. One thing I've touched on it a little bit, but I would love to know where you got your start together in roleplay.
That has to be 12 years ago, 14 years ago, something like that. We actually met on a play-by-post roleplay just ages ago. But we actually started playing tabletop games together about 8 years ago, I think.
That sounds right.
So I had a weekly D&D game since the dawn of time, and she came over and we moved in together and everything, and I was telling her, hey, I got a D&D game that I go to all the time, and she's like, awesome, I played 3.5, so and so we never stopped playing together since.
Play-by-post is a lot of people actually get their start in play-by-post roleplay because they don't have a group or whatever. I know that's not your experience necessarily, but I have a feeling that it's a very different culture of roleplay than many of us are used to or many of us have experienced. Do you feel that that culture of play-by-post roleplay has influenced your design in any way?
I'm going to go ahead and say yes, because the nature of play-by-post is that they kind of have these little moth lives. They're very short-lived. They're usually great for a couple of months and then everybody wanders off. It's not one of those things like a tabletop game where usually we come together once a week and we'll play the same game for a year and we keep the same group forever. With play-by-posts, there really is a very short life. So you're constantly trying to make the next play-by-post scenario, the next game that's going to get really good writers to come and join you in this. And so that's probably where I get my world building chops, is in those scenarios where every couple of months it's like, okay, I have to come up with this whole new setting, this story drive to bring people in and get them excited about coming to play this thing. So yeah, I think that definitely flavors how I approach game building.
Yeah, I agree. I think that coming from that ecosystem, even when I was a participant, when I wasn't running a play-by-post, I always felt the need to make sure that every scene had weight. Everything was kinetic and everything had something for somebody else to latch onto, so that I would get another post. So somebody didn't walk away and say, well, this is boring, let's go find something else to do. The engine behind Court of Blades and really everything we do is basically trying to build a satisfying narrative that hook by hook and scene by scene kind of drives its own complexity forward, drives the scenario to continue being story shaped, to continue giving avenues that everybody can interact with this greater world that's happening, and basically hold your attention, right?
Yeah, I'd say that Blades makes a solid foundation as a game, considering the way the factions are quite important, and you track these relationships to drive new scores in Blades. I mean, here I guess it would be like either missions, social missions, or maybe something else equivalent. Can you talk about how that is expanded or changed in Court of Blades?
Yeah, I think that the biggest departure is that in Blades in the Dark, faction maneuverings, the actual factions you interact with, they have a clock, they have a vague agenda that gets ticked when the GM sees a narrative beat that serves that clock. But it feels, at least from the way that I've run it, the way that I've seen it run, it feels very much like an optional sort of mechanic. And the idea for Court of Blades was to make that almost like a mechanized necessity rather than something that you can take kind of at your leisure. We have dice, we have the faction turn that kind of moves those clocks and creates this really interesting emergent narrative where we have the rise and falls of factions. We have, hopefully, the rise of the player faction in the midst of all of that, although sometimes you lose it all.
You mentioned the player faction. Is that kind of the driver of your narrative?
Yeah, the house itself that you serve, the coterie is serving one of 6 great houses in the city. And based on the actions of the players, the coterie, the house either suffers or gains based almost entirely upon the actions of the player characters. Whereas the other houses, what I secretly refer to as the AI houses, they are using what we call the faction stats, right? So we have faction ratings and 3 different stats that determine how many dice they roll every time they try and pursue a goal at the end of every social season. Based on the nature of that dice roll, they might succeed, they might fail, they might make gains and progress. We might tick those clocks, but there's always something new, and they're constantly juggling these various priorities. And it sounds a lot more complicated when I speak to it, but really it comes down to, at the end of every social season, the GM rolls 4 dice, and that drives narrative.
It sounds to me like the factions in your game are almost a character. Like they have a lot more texture and nuance, which is appropriate for a game all about them.
That was certainly something we were striving for. It was a goal when we outlined what it would take, when we had the initial ideas, what would it take to make this game? One of the things at the top of the list was, how do we make sure that all of the factions feel real, that the world is constantly moving, and we had to mechanize that so that it's not falling completely on the shoulders of the GM to come up with all of these twists and turns. So the way we set it up is that, you roll a few dice and there's some charts there to help you, and at the end of every social season you now have a completely different political scape to inform your players of, for the players to interact with, and it's really very little work for the GM to make those things happen.
So they get the starting template, and then they can kind of expand that and play, it sounds like.
Yeah, exactly. That was something that I, as the forever GM, it was really important to me that the twists and turns, that the kind of narrative that we want to put forward, they came organically. They could come out of an unexpected quarter, but they also didn't require you to make a flow chart or one of those red yarn diagrams of all the various maneuverings and movings and shakings, because I've got a life to live. I love game day, but the thing that I love about Blades in the Dark is that I can sit down with a really simple 15-minute on my drive home sort of scenario and say, okay guys, what are we doing tonight? And then the narrative will emerge organically from the ideas of the players and the random nature of the dice, and it ends up being a satisfying narrative without breaking my brain. And that's what I wanted to bring to this game too.
Thank you for not breaking our brains.
GMs everywhere do thank you for that. We have enough on our plate, so to speak, and it's great to see these wonderful GM tools emerging from the Forge in the Dark space and other games being hacked in this area. I'm interested to know, how does the twists and turns, is there a series tracker, right? Is there one of those things that you have in Blades where you're tracking the various things that happen each session? So we have almost like a storybook after we've played a few sessions?
Well, certainly when Navi is taking my campaign notes, when she's chronicling for our Saturday night group or our Tuesday night group, we definitely have a narrative that gets posted up in the crew Discord. But no, what really the GM turn is kind of all about is that we roll those 4 dice for each of the families, each of the major factions, and that creates a scenario, creates a goal. It needs a little bit of fleshing out. It might be 4 evocative words, right? So it might be a subterfuge action involving force that is both magical and covert, right? So it might be, we're trying to hire a mercenary group of mages as House Battalia this particular season, but they're proving intractable, right? So this is their goal for the social season. But, next season, they might have made inroads in that, but the world keeps coming. So we have to roll them a new goal, and things rapidly become spinning plates. And as they complete these goals, they find themselves in a better position in the city. They are acquiring power and allies and assets, and they're working at cross purposes with all of the other houses.
And I think it's important to mention here that these things that the other houses are trying to achieve, they're not just ideas on a paper that the GM has to deal with and maybe throw a few out. It's actually something that the players can reach out and interact with, because we have mechanics built into the game to uncover a plot. You uncover one of these plots that the GM has rolled up between the social seasons, and you can actively go out and try to essentially kneecap your competition. So, you find out what they're doing, and you might make that your errand for the day is, we're going to do nothing today except for go and try to stop Corvetto from accomplishing what they're trying to accomplish, so that they can't succeed as well as we do this season.
Yeah, political maneuvering, right? So when we say power politics, we mean kneecapping the opposition.
Mm-hmm. It's a little bit like chess, right? So you might not want to go after the house that's directly above you, because, in time you're going to overtake them. You might want to set your sights a little bit higher and really start targeting houses that are more advanced than you and bringing them down so they're easier to overtake later, because the last thing you want is for the houses to run away and all end up very powerful, because then you have a much harder game at the end.
Does your game have an end state? Is there a point at which you have made it to the top?
There is a canon end state, I guess, where the house that you serve, the house here being your crew book, right? So the house that you serve, it ascends to the first house of the Esaltare. They are crowned prince of the city. You become family members in your own right, and at that point the game could be over, but at the same time, heavy is the crown, and there are other houses that are still gunning for you. That being the case, now you've got a vested interest because you're now a titled member of this family. Do you really want to see it all topple the moment that you give up your skullduggery for a cushion?
Awesome. Is the faction sheet as large as it is in Blades, or is it just a few like really important factions? And which is your favorite?
So our faction sheet is quite large. There's only 6 houses of the Esoltari, so you have 5 competitors in that arena, in that race to the top. But there are a number of other factions working within the city. We have the houses minor, you have things like the Bakers Guild and other important things that, the churches and whatnot that all keep everything running. And then we have the uncouth, which are sort of your outsiders and whatnot. And there's a lot of interesting factions. So I would probably have more factions, and I dare say we'll probably add even more factions over time.
I think we have 33 right now.
Yeah.
We have a problem. Complexity. Wow. So we do have the houses minor, which are all the civic functions and the bank of brass and bone, and anything that makes the world go round is a house minor. We have the uncouth, which are mercenaries and gangs, so people who are still very much in the Duskwall mindset will see that Ilrien, the greatest city in the world, still has a seamy underbelly. But then we've also got the outsiders, because we need just a little bit of weirdness involved to get that Renaissance magic going. And as far as my favorite faction...
Yeah, from both of you, I would love to hear.
I know mine.
You know yours? Go please.
Okay. My favorite faction is certainly the Dead Watchers. So we created a faction, and it's another one of those things where if players want to bite off on it, there's plenty of story there, but if they're not interested at all, then they just throw it out and it's unnecessary. But the Dead Watchers essentially are the gravekeepers. They live on the Necropolitan Hill, and they keep the riffraff out, and they make sure that nobody's doing anything unseemly there. But most importantly, we have a Deathless, a very ancient, very powerful mage that is buried alive essentially underneath the Necropolitan Hill, and you don't have to interface with it, but I can tell you that if you let it out, or if somebody else lets it out, all hell would probably break loose. It is alluded to in a few places throughout the book, if that is something that's interesting to people. So I really do love the Death Watchers just kind of hanging out in the graveyard and making sure that a big evil doesn't come to eat this city of politic.
There's of course a notable faction clock for the Sevenfold Veils, the esoteric cultist faction, where they're trying to wake the last Deathless. But my favorite faction is probably Soraya, the outsider, the beggar queen who lives underneath, I think it's the Gilt Bridge, and she and her army of cats, who she refers to as the Royal Guard. I think she might be my favorite.
Wow. I think she's mine too. I only know the 2. Mark, do you have a favorite faction in Blades in the Dark?
I was always drawn to the spookier ones, like the Dimmer Sisters. Yeah, just like the weird factions, like just pick any of those on the right bottom right side of the faction list.
I'm kind of with you. I think mine is actually the Lamp Blacks, because to me they're almost like they could be the player characters if you were, beholden to some kind of older magics and stuff, which is kind of a cool thought. That's kind of why they're my favorite. But I like factions in general because they give you such good fiction in a tight package. In many ways, you only even need their name to really kind of go wild with what they can do. And so the idea of a whole bunch of factions in your game is really exciting to me. It seems like a good way to jumpstart the fiction.
Yeah, 30's not that bad. I mean, 33, but what, you got 4 categories, maybe 8, for each one. Not too bad. You could probably do 12. That wouldn't be too bad. That's the way I looked at it, I guess, when I was designing factions for my game, too. I was like, more of these couldn't hurt.
Never have too many.
That's right, yeah, and we've got so many of them that we had, and we had kind of half ideas for, and maybe there'll be a supplement that's just Factions of Ilrien, and it's just 180 pages of factions and things like that.
The Death Watchers saga, I would totally read that. That's my vote anyway.
So in Blades in the Bark, I think is actually a thing that exists.
Dogs in the Bark.
Dogs in the Bark.
Dogs in the Bark. You're right. Yeah, people should look up that if they can find it. It's really cool. But in Blades in the Dark, the factions are all in many ways mechanically they're very simple. They have a tier which is compared to the crew's tier, and they have hold, which is kind of just like a representation of what kind of property and land they have in Duskfall. And other than that, they have projects and a list of folks who are in charge of them, etc. It sounds like in your game it's a little more fleshed out. But what I'm really interested in is how do we measure, success in terms of like measuring ourselves against other factions in Crown of Blades? Because in Blades in the Dark, it's very much just who is higher than us and who is lower than us. That's kind of the main way in which we judge our progress.
Yeah, no, it is interesting in Court of Blades, especially when you're starting off and you're that little, minimal tier, you have no levels essentially under your belt, and you realize that you still have to interface with very powerful factions, and you're working for a powerful house will only get you so far because these people still don't know you, they still don't respect you, even if they have to respect the Esoltari by law. So that is an interesting thing that we play with there.
So I think that the biggest differentiation, the maneuverings, like the big, large-scale maneuverings of the Esoltari are dictated by the GM turn, by the faction turn, which, gleefully stolen name from Stars Without Number. The minor factions are handled much in the same way. The Houses Minor, the Uncouth, and the Outsiders are handled very similarly to Blades in the Dark, just for ease of use and for ease of good grist for the story mill. They still have clocks, they still have aspirations, they still have notable territories and NPCs and things like that. They're supposed to be familiar enough to pick up and turn into story. The Esoltari, however, are the ones who are constantly moving and shifting, and you'll never know exactly where they're going next unless you spend those downtime actions to uncover plots.
Yeah, and speaking about the progression as well, I noticed that back in June you posted an update talking about slower progression and how social seasons were being introduced as well. Could you talk about how each of those might be affecting gameplay together?
Yeah, it was really important for us in this game to slow down the progression. In a lot of Forged in the Dark games, there are quick burns. You finish in, maybe 10 sessions. Otherwise, you have characters that have, really bloated skills and abilities and action dots to throw around. So, suddenly they're throwing 4 dice at everything. And we wanted to kind of scale that back and make sure that it takes a little bit longer for you to reach those levels of power so that the game can stretch to the necessary length to really fulfill its purpose, which is really deep political maneuvering. You want to be able to forge multiple alliances, lots of rivals, really interact with NPCs and kind of develop your character and build a world. And in order to do that, I think that we were shooting for a much longer campaign, really more like 20-30 sessions as opposed to a dozen. So it was really important to scale back how quickly you could get very powerful. Otherwise, everybody would be maxed out on everything halfway through the game.
And I think the social seasons, that was a way that we could use to kind of bring the changes that would happen in a longer term game kind of to the forefront. This is kind of your idea here now, so if you wanted to talk a little bit about the social seasons and how that all kind of plays together, I think you got a better handle on it than I do.
So the social seasons were created to add an additional pressure cooker element to the game. Everything's really constrained because now you have 5 different tasks that you really need to accomplish, but the social season only allows you to complete 3 of those tasks. Now you're really forced to prioritize which of those really must get done, and the ones that fall to the wayside can create a lot of very real problems for your characters because you might miff an ally or you might make your position with a rival even worse. So social seasons were kind of the opposite of slowing down progression, actually. So we slow down progression as far as how much XP you can gain and whatnot, but the social seasons were really more about making certain that you cannot accomplish everything that you want to accomplish. That's going to create a lot of tension politically and socially because you have all of those obligations. They don't disappear just because you don't have time.
And that's where that GM turn kind of comes in. It's at least from the GM standpoint, because it was the part of the social season that I kind of came up with. The roles at the end of every season, they inform the fiction and they show what your rivals are doing kind of behind the scenes. Like the city will change between each season, and that's what the social season is there for. It drives more fiction.
Oh, I love that. Yeah, I love that. That sounds great. I think that will, allow people to really stew in the greatness of such a big faction drama going on.
I have one, I think, last question for you on the topic of factions and what have you. If someone wanted to, let's say, a listener of the show who's a fan of Blades in the Dark, and their dream is to run a version of your game in the Blades in the Dark setting, would that be an easy enough thing to do?
Yeah, I think that Court of Blades could work in Duskfall. I don't know necessarily that it would be a one-for-one translation of all the various mechanics that would fit neatly into Duskfall, but I think that a game of Court of Blades, like a really satisfying game in a lot of ways, could be run maybe even like among the underworld factions, like almost like a Gangs of New York thing. That'd be really, really interesting to see, because the wheelings and dealings in Ilrian are predicated upon favor. Like, coin is not a problem for our retainers, but for scoundrels, coin is king, right? So you might have to go back to an economy of coin, but otherwise, I think all of the tools that we include in Court of Blades could very easily make the transition into the Shattered Isles. Could be used in Duskfall to show the various wheelings and dealings, the maneuverings that all of these rival gangs and factions have. You could even just whole cloth take kind of the social season and set agendas for all of the various other factions, at least the ones that the players are interested in dealing with. And that's a way to drive further emergent fiction in a Blades in the Dark game, by running it kind of like Court of Blades. I don't think that Duskfall has a very fleshed out like nobility, but it'd be super interesting to see all of the scheming that's happening at the top while all of the hardscrabble scoundrels are down in the gutter trying to amass their fortune. So I think even if you wanted to port it whole cloth over, it would just need some more. I mean, all the world building in Forged in the Dark games is typically kept pretty evocative and vague, but that kind of soft world building would need a little bit more fleshing out just to make the game of houses work. But I really want to play that game where you're, wondering what the Lamp Blacks are up to this particular season. Like, you can go and you can uncover what it is that Bazo Baz and his folks are doing this season. That's really cool for me.
Some guidance for people to transfer the factions of Blades in the Dark to your game could be really cool. I'm sure there are a lot of people who would love to play a more political game of Blades in the Dark. Not that people don't already, but a game that's a little bit more in the style of that courtly intrigue drama that your game seems like it provides.
I think that we've got a couple of underworld factions. We've got the uncouth side of our faction sheet, and we tried to bring a variety of kind of underworlds and unsavories and people who are out of fashion and things like that. If we wanted to make a more robust kind of criminal underworld in Ilrian, like that'd be really cool. And I mean, bringing the outsiders from Duskfall whole cloth over into Ilrian would actually be really interesting. We have a conspiracy kind of like the Circle of Flames, but what if there was a competing conspiracy to the Sevenfold Veils, the Circle of Flames? That would draw out a lot more delicious and interesting tension.
Before we wind down, I do have one question I'm curious about, just because it's something I would look for in a game of factional intrigue personally, which is there romance? Are there mechanics for romance?
Court of Blades it's a romantic setting. It invites romance. We encourage romance with the language of the game, and you'll find a lot of scenarios where romance is sort of a pivotal point in the errand itself. So you'll need to help someone with a romantic endeavor or stop a romantic endeavor that's not in, the house does not favor that particular arrangement. It's in the air, right? But we didn't mechanize it, not in the way that we've seen other games mechanize it, Monster Hearts and things like that. And I think that it was just a choice to make it something that is a player's choice. What is comfortable at the table? Is that something that the table is actually interested in? And I'm not personally a fan of foisting, romance upon people. Like, you must have romance. So it is a part of the setting. You don't have to personally interact with it. You can still go and stop the prince's courtier from running away with the buskin. You can still go and interact with that romance without yourself having to engage in personal romance. But by all means, your downtime actions are yours, what you do with NPCs, and I love romance. I always find a way in our games to kind of latch on to a character, and I encourage that. I think it's a lot of fun, and it develops your character, which is really important in Court of Blades. This is a character story game. We give you lots of time to develop your character and build relationships and tell the interesting story that you really want to tell. So by all means, engage in romance, but no, we have not recognized it.
That's enough for me. That's what I think I can get what I want out of that. Well, thank you, Navi and Sean, for joining us today and for all your insights into Court of Blades and factions and factional drama. We really appreciate it. If our listeners want to learn more about you or your games, where can they go?
Well, you can find us at, you can find Court of Blades at courtofblades.com. We both run Twitters. I'm at Drake and Dice, if you want to hear my grognard musings and connect with that. Navi has Navi Musing, at Navi Musing. She has a lot of good stuff on there as well. Mostly you can come for the banter and stay for the games talk. But then we also have our itch.io. We're a couple of Drakes on itch.io. We are going to be putting up some more Blades in the Dark content and some more bite-sized stuff up on our itch.
Before I let you go, you're also part of an actual play currently. Do you want to shout out your characters?
Yeah, so we are in David's Vergence, which is a game of these kind of interstellar travelers. They're human, but they're very, very powerful, right? So there are these bloodlines that allow them to walk between dimensions. So despite the fact that they are super powerful, they still have very human problems, familial problems. And in that regard, it's really a lot of fun, because it's almost like what happens when superheroes have family issues. So we play this group that is coming together for a masked ball to help each other with a host of interesting problems that we've gathered they can all be resolved in one place. And I'm playing Ananki. She is a shaman from the Serpent. It is quite literally a massive serpent that just kind of swims through space and has grown an entire civilization on its back. That really spoke to me. I think that he does some really wonderful world building, and I was on board the moment that I read that. I was like, yes, that's totally me. What about you?
I'm playing Valrio in that particular game. David's Vergence is super cool. I'm playing an adept of the power from the caverns of Agaros, and it's really fun being a member of this masked ball and brushing shoulders with these really powerful characters. A powerful character in my own right, but it's a super fun game, and I hope that everybody watches the live stream of it, because I think it is a really fun one that we're going to see great things from.
Beautiful. Thank you for joining us today. This has been a great episode of Hacked in the Dark, a podcast featuring Forged in the Dark games and their designers. Once again, I'm Justin.
And I'm Mark.
As we go out, Mark, are you doing anything for the Unusual Suspects Jam?
Yeah, I wanted to do something sort of along the lines of a child playbook, but I think it's going to be a different focus. I think it's going to be ageless, and maybe that's the name of the book, The Ageless.
Ooh.
So I'm kind of let that stew a little bit, and just basically maybe a mix of like being between states, right? Like someone who's not yet a ghost, but has done something to kind of halfway cross over or something.
Well, people can check that out whenever they listen to this. Check it out on itch.io, Unusual Suspects Jam. I'm actually really excited again about all the playbooks people are creating, and it's looking like people are going to be able to create whole games just with these playbooks. I'm noticing themes of nautical playbooks. I'm sure people will be able to put together like a nautical adventure after this of the playbooks that have been created. Thank you all for joining us for Hacked in the Dark. And remember, when it comes to design, we all begin our journey as hacks in the dark.